Me, a bro.
Yep.
He, a dude.
That's good stuff. All right. Let's try it. Okay. Welcome to the We Will Journey podcast. We're talking about faith and life as it happens, and not the glossy exterior we wish it was. What, man? What did I do wrong?
I think you said it's because all the things I was thinking about before. But we can edit that. You got that part good.
Oh.
You got it good. Okay.
All right.
Okay, just...
Now it's your turn.
Good.
Yeah.
Wait. We're going to get under the surface. I should have said all those things before. We should have waited down and dirty until after we read this part.
Okay.
Okay. Wait. We get under the surface and explore the down and dirty. Okay. Maybe we should. It doesn't have to be word for word, right?
No. I mean, I gave an interpretation.
Okay. All right. We get under the surface and explore the down and dirty of life as it pertains to our beliefs, our relationships, politics, and absolutely everything else.
Oh, there we go. That was good. All right.
When I'm dead, laying in my coffin, all my friends all gather around. They can say I'm just sleeping, good Lord, the sweet peace I have found.
3, 2, 1.
Well, Bill, my buddy Seth Sanders on the line with us. Seth is originally from Seward. And I don't know, do you go to the E-Free Church in Seward, Bill, when you do make your rounds?
I've never been to the Free Church in Seward. No, I hit a lot of free churches in Hamilton County and Grand Island and Hastings, but never been to one in Seward, no.
Yep, so that's the church he grew up in, and he's actually a missionary in Innsbruck, Austria now. So that's where he and his wife are. Tell us, Bill, about this transition. So you talked about it, like God kind of drug you out of Aurora to Denver, and we've talked about what your ministry is there, but it's super interesting to me. But maybe just tell us about that a little bit.
Okay, well, for whatever reason, as a brand new Christian, and again, because I wasn't raised with a dog in the fight, I come into the church and not knowing the whole argument about tongues or Calvinism or Arminian or all the things that Christians have thought about, right? I don't know any of that. But I am willing to talk to people. And so I came up here to Western Bible College. I'm working at Cinderella City, and there's all these bizarre groups in the parking lots and in the mall. Cinderella City was small west of the Mississippi at the time here in Denver. And there's hard Christians in the parking lot. The Moonies are in the parking lot. And everybody's running away from them as fast as they can. And I'm like, well, who are these guys? What are they all about? I go talk to them, Yeah. And every time I talk to them, I find out I know virtually nothing about them. Then I have Mormons come to the door. I never talked to them before. Jehovah's Witnesses coming by. And every one of these things sparked in me a desire to find out what the heck they were saying and why were they saying it. What does the Bible say about this? So my spiritual dad at the time was at the college and was just a real influence on my life. But he would always open up. And I come in and say, hey, I was talking to these Mormons. Why are they saying this? And what does the Bible say about that? It made me study. So the next time I talked to Mormons, I was more prepared. And this just kept going. And by the time I come to Nebraska, now I've been talking to lots of different groups. And Nebraska is not exactly cult central, but there are some interesting groups out there. The Baha'i are there. I'd never even talked to Baha'i in Denver, even though there's a large community here. But the Baha'i Aurora had a large public presence, numerically not that many. The LDS were in, there in Aurora. There was a weird, bizarre cult over in York. It was a UPC church, United Pentecostal, which is already a cult theologically, but a lot of control. In the cult world, they call this shepherding, where the leaders, or in this case, the pastor, literally controls every single thing you do, where you live, what job you take, what job you don't take, who do you marry, who do you divorce. I mean, they control everything. And this group was sending people into Hamilton County to sell, this is so strange, I remember this, but they were selling peanut brittle to raise money for their cult. And so I ended up talking to them. So again, for whatever reason, I was always weirdly attracted to talking to people that most Christians don't want to talk to. So at our time in Nebraska, again, it was mainly, doing a lot of evangelism with youth groups and Bible studies with young people and stuff. And we just fell in love with youth ministry there, and youth ministry is really expanding. And we have, I mentioned an autistic son that caused a lot of struggles in our marriage and all this sad stuff. And we, by God's grace alone, survived that, and the ministry just took off. And all of a sudden, my last year, about a year and a half before we left, this would be in 1989, we started getting all these offers, completely undesired, completely unsolicited, from some of these these big national organizations, asking me if I'd be willing to come on their staff. One was what's later is the Christian Research Institute, or they had a show with Walter Martin called The Bible Answer Man, which I'd loved for years. I have a lot of respect for Walter Martin, who's the founder of The Bible Answer Man and CRI, and they asked me if I'd like to come on staff. And then Spiritual Counterfeits out of Berkeley, California, who was doing very frontline work on the culture, work on the different religious issues in the culture, dealing with all sorts of bizarre cults that most people never interacted with, and they're being sued, and all these terrible things going on. And then one of my professors from seminary, Gordon Lewis, who was a dear friend and a mentor for many years, Gordon represented the Conservative Baptists. I went to a Conservative Baptist seminary. At the time it was called, that's now Denver Seminary, but I had no connection to the Baptist Church or Conservative Baptist Church or anything like that. But he had been trying to convince them to appoint missionaries to this whole big thing that was really coming up in the public awareness in the 1980s called the New Age movement. Mm-hmm. And Time Magazine, Life Magazine, all the Oprah Winfrey and Phil Donahue and all the talk shows were having channelers, these people who speak to ancient warriors from Atlantis or aliens from outer space, all this bizarre stuff. It's all over the media. It's all over the culture. And so Gordon's trying to convince the CBs to appoint a full-time missionary to that. And they finally agreed after a couple of years of lobbying. And they basically said, if you find somebody foolish enough, well, there I was. And so Gordon sends me a letter on the middle of nowhere, Nebraska, and I'm just enjoying the heck out of it. So I get 3 offers inside of about 6 months. And none of them are what I wanted to do. I had no connections to the organizations. I respected them, but I had no connections to them. I liked what I was doing. I did not want to raise support to be a missionary. I mean, I remember talking to Rich Pohl from CRI, and we were having this discussion about the support raising. And he says, Bill, if God calls you, he's going to provide. And I said, I know that. I've been telling young people to do this for years, but I don't want to do it. Right. I always joke, I may not make much money as a youth minister, but at least I'm fairly confident the money will be there this month.
Right.
Well, if you're on mission, Seth, you understand. Raising support is no fun at all. And I've been doing this now for 30 years, and it's still not fun. But that was my objection. So I basically tabled all these things. Walter Martin died that year, so I figured CR is going to die. Spiritual Counterfeits got sued by a nasty cult called the Local Church of Witness Lee. Basically sued them out of existence. They had to go bankrupt and reorganize. So I figured those are dead ends. The CB one, I had no real connections other than my teacher that I loved. And so I basically just tabled these things. And I get a letter from the CB president, who I didn't know and never met. And he says, Gordon was talking to us about this, and we don't know what to make of this. Have you considered this? Are you thinking about, maybe you should pray about it? So I basically told him, okay, I'll pray. So I put the application back up on the shelf, and I wouldn't pray. I literally would not pray. I was so worried that God was saying, yes, why am I getting all these offers from out of state, all undesired? It's not like I had a headhunter looking for me, for a position or something. So we finally said, okay, we'll look at them. And like I said, Walter had died, so we figured CR was shut, Spiritual Counterfeits were bankrupt. So we looked at the CB thing. And they offered to send us out to interview to Los Angeles, where my mom and a lot of my family lived. And I'm at CRI. I'm a poor little, or CRC, excuse me, a poor little youth minister. I got no money for a vacation ever, but they're going to fly us to Los Angeles. So I told my wife, Terry, I said, hey, look, let's just go out. We'll tell them the stuff. We aren't all that interested. And we'll get a free vacation out of this. We can visit mom and the family.
Right.
And I looked at it. And so we went out there, and I have many friends that have been in missions for many years, and there's several things they tell you. One, they want marital stability. Two, they want financial stability. And Gordon Lewis had asked me about this, and he says, well, how long will it we incurred a tremendous amount of debt because of my son's medical condition, and we couldn't get insurance for him, blah, 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 blah. And he says, well, how long will it take you to get out of debt? And I said, can you spell eternity, We're just looking at these bills. We're going to be chasing this forever. So we figured we'll go in. We'll be brutally honest. Yeah, we went through a real struggle in our marriage. Yes, we have tremendous debt. And they'll say, gosh, thank you so much for coming out to talk to us about this. Try again when everything's back to, when your marriage is in good shape, blah, blah, blah. And it was in good shape by then, but we'd really gone through a lot. So we thought we'd get a vacation out of this. And we literally, it's the first time in my life I ever put, and I mean this quite literally, I ever put myself underneath others' decision-making process. So when God says to trust the elders who are called over you, I could give lip service to that, but actually doing it was a different thing. And I can argue pretty successfully. I can tell you why this group is wrong about this or that. And so when my elders would tell me something I didn't like, even my elders in my board in CRC in Nebraska, I could just, I knew I could beat them up, theologically. And sometimes I would. Well, this is the first time now that I said, okay, I'm just going to trust that the elders, both my elders here at CRC and the elders of the CPs, I'm going to put myself in their hands. Lord, you know better. You're not going to call me to this other mission. Things are going well here in Aurora. And so then we go out, and these fools decide to appoint us anyways, completely against their normal process, completely against how all mission agencies hire people.
Wow.
We were so brutally honest, and they appointed us. And I was really upset. So that's one side of this whole thing, right? So we take our little vacation, which was great, which is what we were really aiming for. We come back to Nebraska, and I don't know if you knew him, Seth. I don't think so. But Tyler, you probably know Paul Nauman.
Yep.
Yeah, from Stockholm and the head of CRC. So Paul and I would always have meetings every Monday morning just to shoot the breeze. How are you doing? What's going on in ministry? What's going on in life? Talk about whatever. That was just kind of our team building, just the two of us, every Monday morning. So we get back from our trip. I come in Monday morning to meet with Paul, and Paul's crying. I mean, he's really upset. And I'm like, what's up? He says, I haven't talked to him. I hadn't said a word about what happened in LA. And he says, I don't want you to go, but I really think God is calling you to go. And I'm like, oh, Christ, shut up. Don't talk this way. I don't want to hear this. I had so determined that we weren't going to do this unless the elder said so. And now both sets are saying so. And I'm just like, oh, no, God is calling me to this. And I was, kind of weirded out. But again, it was against what my heart desired. Yet I put myself under leadership for the first time as a Christian. I'm 33 years old, and all of a sudden I'm now in a position where I'm going to have to actually think that God is speaking through my elders. So anyhow, we started on the process of, one thing that Paul blessed us with is he allowed us to raise support for the mission. Again, I'm in central Nebraska, going to work for Conservative Baptists about the New Age movement. There's no Conservative Baptists in Nebraska, so nobody knows who they are. Secondly, what's this whole New Age thing? And I said, well, I'm going to be talking to witches, and I'm going to be talking to psychics, and they're all like, what? That doesn't exist. It's central Nebraska. They've never heard of this. And I said, well, actually, you go to Denver, LA, you go to New York, this stuff's everywhere.
Yeah.
So anyways, but most of the people didn't know what that meant by the New Age, and they didn't know what the Conservative Baptists were. And I hated raising support. So Paul blessed me by letting me continue on to stay with CRC for the last year I was there and going through this support raising process, which I was doing very badly. I broke all the guidelines that I was supposed to do. But God had a plan. That's why I said, he won the fight. And we ended up leaving, and so we became the CB's first missionary, and as far as we know, the only missionary in the country from any agency to work primarily with New Age people. So we started going to psychic fairs. That was our first start, and New Age bookstores. And so all of a sudden I'm talking to witches, and I'm talking to astrologers, and I'm talking to tarot card, people, and to crystal people, and aromatherapy, and all this, bizarre, strange stuff. And you guys will both appreciate it. You're both from Central Nebraska. So I come back a couple of years, and I'm speaking at Pleasant View one night to all these farm folks, right? And I'm telling them about these conversations. So I'm speaking on Sunday night. I'm telling everybody about these conversations I'm having with witches. Now, again, like everybody else, I watched Bewitched. I saw The Wizard of Oz. Witches, that's a fiction. Nobody takes it seriously, right?
Right.
And I started meeting all these people who really do take it seriously. Lots of people, hundreds of thousands of people across the country took this seriously, and I was like a whole new world. So I'm talking to them, and one of the fellows there, one of the farmers there in Aurora, he's just freaking out, and he's going, Bill, seriously. This is in the public meeting. He's asking me these questions. He says, Bill, you're talking to witches? How can you talk to witches? He's just so freaked out by this. And I said, Dick, I was a youth pastor to middle school people, to middle school kids. I can do anything. The whole room started cracking up, Anybody's worked with middle school kids knows exactly what I'm talking about. There are no bridges you can't cross.
Email. That's right, I said email. Seems like everybody's got one these days, even us. So if you want to get in contact with us or chat about the weather, you can shoot us an email at wewilljourney.connect@gmail.com. Look forward to hearing from you or reading from you.
But that's where it all started. And so for years we were going to the psychic fairs. But we noticed something else was happening. We were also getting calls. Hey, my brother's a Muslim. Hey, my son-in-law's a Mormon. Hey, we started getting all these calls for groups that weren't formally New Age. And even the New Age was changing. It was becoming the new spirituality. Then it became spirituality. I'm not into religion. I'm into spirituality. That's the kind of thing. You still hear that today.
Right.
But we started talking to all these different groups. So in 1999, so I've been out of Nebraska for 8 or 9 years at this point, with the Conservative Baptists. But in 1999, we formed Haven, several pastors in the area, and Paul Nauman and a few others from Nebraska were on my board, with the idea of, we still want to talk to New Agers, but oh, by the way, we're talking to Muslims, we're talking to atheists, we're talking to Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, and Buddhists and Hindus and Jains and science. We're talking to all sorts of people who aren't formally New Age. So the ministry started with 4. It's up to about 20 now. Some full-time, some part-time, some interns. And basically we talk to everybody. And we still go to psychic fairs and bookstores and stuff like that. But we also go to Mormon temple openings. We go to, our big events are things like the Parliament of World Religions. We've gone to several of these. These happen every 3 or 4 years around the world. It's every religion you can think of in one place for like 10 days. There'll be 15,000 people there from India, from Pakistan, from South Africa, you name the place. And the Dalai Lama will show up. Just amazing, the big names in the religion. But thousands of lay people show up. It's really quite a zoo. It's a fascinating thing to go to. You go to the exhibit hall, and every 10 feet is a whole different universe. So here's the Scientologist right next to the Theravada Buddhists, which might be next to a group of Shia Muslims, which might be right next to a group of witches. So you're literally going down the hall and conversing with people from all over the world who are completely different in their worldviews. And so that's, like I said, for us, it's a target-rich environment. That's sweet, because go back to the thing I told you about the girl. These people are there to talk. And you go to psychic fairs, most people are there to sell. Scientologists, Eckankar, Urantia, there's always groups that are recruiting usually. But at the big thing, the big parliaments, these people are there to recruit. They're there to tell you how wonderful their goddess is, their gods, their guru. And so we love those kind of events because I think I've gone to 5 of them now. Every religion you can think of. So not only are we learning, who are these people? What the heck is this all about? But we're getting a chance to engage them with the gospel, and had wonderful conversations with witches, with Sikhs. It's a very interesting religion out of India. So many different groups around the world. So like we were at the Parliament 2 years ago in Toronto, a year and a half ago in Toronto, and I'm talking to Muslims. I'm from Indonesia. I'm talking to gay Buddhists from California. I'm talking to Hindus from India, Mormon, Korean lady. I'd never run into Korean Mormons before, but they had a booth there. Just so many strange things. So I always tell people our job is never boring. There's always something new and bizarre. But ultimately, these people are all made in the image of God. They're all sinners. They all need a Savior. So there is a commonality to all the people we talk to, even though on the surface you think, this is the most incredibly diverse thing you've ever seen in your life. So that's what we've been doing now for close to 30 years. Haven, like I said, has been around since '99 as a formal organization. And some of the people work like me. They raise their support. Others have pensions. Others are still working their jobs, and so they work with us part-time. Mm-hmm. So that's what we do.
Wow. So, Bill, the question that you deal with all the time and that we knew you'd be perfect to talk to about is this concept of all paths leading to heaven or all paths leading to God.
Sure.
And so talk to us about that in any way that you see fit. But what is that idea basically? And then how do you move that conversation to a Christian faith perspective? How do you do that? And why do you do that?
Well, I'm just a hater, of course.
Yeah.
Screaming at me over this point, hater, racist, Nazis, okay. Actually, I was just here to ask you a question, but, go right ahead. I also teach at several universities and colleges here in the Denver area. I teach world religions or comparative religions. I teach ethics and intro to philosophy, but that's just a sideline. But it's also an extension of the mission because I get to bring up Christian worldview in all sorts of really fun places with a lot of students who are not Christian. In fact, the majority of my students are not Christian, of course. But this question comes up constantly. And so let me give you some illustrations that I actually give people. So there was a show, you guys are both old enough to remember the show called America's Most Wanted.
Mm-hmm. All
right, so about 20 years ago, there was a nasty cult out of the Denver area. If you go searching, you're going to find my name all over this thing because the media, I learned what the words media storm mean. It was unbelievable. I was getting calls every single day from all over the world, from CBS, from ABC, from 2020, about this cult leader in Denver named Kim Miller. The group was called the Concerned Christians, and they were not concerned, and they were not Christian. Nasty bunch, and Kim Miller is really a nasty guy. But the media is all over him because this is about 5 years after the Waco, disaster to David Koresh, and everybody thought Jim Jones, David Koresh, now maybe Kim Miller. So the media is all over this guy because they think he's going to do mass murder or suicide, which, by the way, I would still say he's capable of. He's that bad a guy. Okay, having said that, America's Most Wanted decided to do a show on him, so they came and interviewed me.
Wow.
And so while they're setting up the cameras in my living room to talk to me about Kim Miller and the Concerned Christians, because I'd interacted with him several times, the producer of the show is a guy named Lucky Severinsen. He's the executive producer, excuse me. And he had been in Vietnam correspondent during the Vietnam War. I think he worked for CBS. And so he's living in Thailand for years reporting on the Vietnam War. All right. So I have a faint memory as a kid of seeing him on TV. So we're literally in the living room of, they're setting up in the living room. We're in the kitchen talking about this. And he just out of the blue, because he knows I'm a Christian missionary, right? He says, you know what? You Christians really tick me off. How dare you say Jesus is any better than Lao Tzu or Krishna or Moses or anybody else? It just really makes me mad. I mean, he's ranting like this for 2 minutes, and then he looks at me, he smiles, and goes, I bet we're going to have an argument, aren't we? And I said, let's go for it. Let's do it. I said, you lived in Thailand for several years. And he goes, that's right. I said, so you tell me how it is that a Thai Buddhist farmer can take his 8-year-old daughter and sell her to the whorehouse in Bangkok knowing what's going to happen to her. And his first reaction, this is word for word, he goes, Bill, you don't understand how good that is for the local economy.
Wow.
That was word for word his response. And I gave him a dirty look. Like every time I tell the story, I get these students who with this horrible look on their face. And I gave him that look too. And then he goes, well, okay, maybe it's not the best thing. But it's interesting, his knee-jerk response is to defend the absolute indefensible. Well, if I'm a Buddhist, I can defend that in at least 3 different ways. The world's an illusion, Maya. It doesn't exist. There is no girl. There is no rapist. Karma. It's her activities from a previous life. Perhaps she was the rapist in a previous life, and now she has to be raped to balance her karma. Or the Buddhist doctrine of anatta, which means you don't exist. Nobody exists. So there's no rapist, there's no farmer, there's no daughter. Get over it. That's inside of 30 seconds I can bring this up. The reason I illustrate with this kind of story is that most people who address this question know very little about Christianity and almost nothing about any other religion. It's just kind of an assumption. So there's a very famous story. It must be true because Oprah Winfrey said it. There's a very famous story, and I start off every world religions class with the story of the 5 blind men and the elephant. Have you guys heard this story?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay, well, let me revise it for you guys then. So 5 blind guys are circling an elephant, all touching a different part: the legs, the tusks, the tail, the side, and the nose. And so they're all touching something different. Oh, an elephant's like this. No, it's like this. So they're all contradicting each other. But here's the narrator of the story, assuring them that what they don't understand is that they're all touching the same thing. Well, here's the moral of the story. All religions are just like this. Everybody's touching the exact same thing, but because of cultural and language differences, they don't realize that they're talking about the same thing. And let's just all give each other a group hug because all religions are really the same. And my class tends to love that because it's a popular idea, that the religions really are all teaching the same thing. Now, there's different versions of this. One version of this formula is called pluralism, the belief that God works through all the different religions equally, which is what you run into a lot of people, including, sadly, a lot of people sitting in pews in Christian churches. Then there's a second view called inclusivism, which means that Jesus is important. Jesus had to die, but you don't have to believe in Jesus to be saved. So you can be a Hindu, a Buddhist, or whatever, and you're still saved because of what Jesus did, even though you don't believe. Now, sadly, this has been pushed forward by people like Rick Warren and the current Pope and Francis, and there's quite a few people pushing this inclusivist view. And in the bad position, the nasty people, the mean Nazi-type people, well, that's me and you guys. That's called exclusivism. Of course, to be exclusive is seen as a bad thing. If you believe Jesus is the only way and you have to believe it in him, believe in the gospel, then you're a nasty, mean person for saying this thing. So that's the boundaries that have been established out there. So most people like the elephant story. And not only is the analogy dishonest because there is somebody in the story that sees, the narrator sees everything, doesn't he? Well, how did he get, in philosophy called a special privilege, how did he get his position where he can see what the rest of us blind morons can't see? Thing, right? You can't take, and this is one of the things I point out to my class, we're going to take that elephant and beat it like a baby seal on the ice. It's going to be a wreck by the time we're done because it's dishonest. You can't study the religions for more than 5 minutes without realizing how radically different they are. And it doesn't make you a bad person for saying that.
Right.
But I was in religious studies at the University of Denver, heading towards my doctorate type stuff. And it was amazing. Hindu teacher, Buddhist professor, Jewish professors, Christians, alleged Christian professors, Muslim professors, and they all will give you a version of the elephant. And I'm like, these are smart people, and they know better. So they're being dishonest to me. They know darn well that there's such a radical distinction. There's a reason why Hindus and Muslims have been killing each other for 1,300 years. There's a reason why Hindus and or Jews and Muslims hate each other. There's a reason why Christians are not the same thing as Jewish people. I mean, there's differences, and it's okay to say that.
Right.
But when you challenge that, people get really upset because they have this deep core, I would say, emotional attachment to the idea that all the religions are like the blind guys. We're all just one big happy family. We just don't see it yet. So to come in and challenge this idea and say Jesus is the only way is very offensive. So I told you about Lucky Severinson's version of that, but I've had a zillion conversations on that very point. So you're a bad person for bringing it up, that there's differences. I was teaching a class at CCU, Colorado Christian University, 20 years ago. The guy that brought me in to teach ended up getting fired over this. That's how serious this got. This is a Christian school with a very strong Christian doctrine statement, allegedly. And this lady started screaming in the class because of some of the stuff I was talking about in relationship to Hinduism. I wasn't even critiquing it. I was just pointing out some of the things they believed, and she started screaming at me.
Wow.
And I was trying to calmly explain to her, well, all I'm telling you is that this is what they actually teach. This is what they believe. I literally was not critiquing. But you can't say anything that is deemed as negative without people going off. So a lot of times our conversations at the psychic fairs are very short. Now, that's not our goal, I always tell people, this intolerance that you see all over the world, I've been running into it forever because I've been in the very liberal universities and I've been going to psychic fairs. So I have been screamed at, cussed at, spit at, threatened by some of the most loving, tolerant people in the world. Just ask them. But if you ask a question, how does this work? If that's what you said about this, well, what about this other thing you said? You just point out a very obvious contradiction. And sometimes they want to think and talk, and that's what we hope for. And sometimes they start screaming. I mean, literally throwing, fits right there in the booth. You're a hater, you're a racist. We're not even talking about race issues or anything like that. You can't say anything negative about anybody's religion.
Hey guys, it's Seth. Some of you might be wondering, I wish there was a way to follow these guys and what they're up to. Well, I don't know if you heard about a little thing called the internet. That's right. If you check us out at twitter.com/WeWillJourney1, you'll be able to keep updated on what we're up to and maybe some future interviews or projects we're working on. Catch you later.
So that's one part. Another part of the same phenomenon is the belief that religion is just based on your personal choices or your cultural background, and there's no evidence for any of these things. So I got a student right now who hit that up with me a couple of weeks ago that, religion is just, people just believe stuff that can't be proven. That's a very popular idea. And I told him, Cody, actually, I don't think that's the case at all. I mean, there are things like that where people just say things that they can't possibly prove, but I don't think religion really is all based on that. In fact, you get into the Jewish and Christian faith. So I'm starting to introduce into this fact that faith is not the enemy of reason, nor is it the enemy of facts. In fact, it's built on those things. And he had never run into that before because it's routine for people to think that faith is what you believe when you have no proof, no evidence. And that's what religion is. So these are bottom line beliefs. All religions are basically the same, and they have no connection to any reality, any evidence, anything like this. And so that's pretty much what I run into most of the time is a combination of those two factors. It's not helped by the fact that, again, people like Rick Warren are out there saying, well, it doesn't matter if you even believe, Jesus still saves you. The Pope just said it again last week. He's like saying this every other month. Wow. So, like I said, we're going into a hostile world. A lot of the churches are not supportive, I'm talking about financially, they're not supportive theologically with what we teach. And when this whole emerging thing came up 20 years ago and is now into the, there's progressive Christianity or whatever you want to call it, to say that you're right makes you a bad person. That's not being humble. How dare you say you're right? I'm like, dude, I'm not saying I'm right. I'm saying Jesus is right. I'm going to go with what he says here. But like I said, we get opposition in Christian churches all the time. At least, people identify themselves as Christian. It's anachronistic to say Jesus is the only way. It makes you a bad person. It makes you a bad dinner company. What's wrong with you people? Why can't you just let people be? I had one teacher at a very prominent Christian college yelling at my wife, how brave he was to yell at my wife, not me, over the fact that we were witnessing to people in this Kim Miller cult I was telling you about a little while ago. Why don't you just let them be? They made their choice. Like, wow, we actually changed our verse on our prayer cards and everything. It used to be from Timothy when Paul says that, in the later days, the Spirit clearly teaches that many will depart from the faith and give heed to doctrines of demons and deceptive spirits, right? And we changed it to the story of Jesus telling the story of the 99 and the 1. Which one of you wouldn't go back? Because I was so amazed that a Christian leader would tell me we shouldn't talk to people in cults.
Wow.
How can you leave these people behind? To me, that's the one, right? That's the person that needs the gospel. Especially when you get around the damage. We have people we know that were in the Koresh group. We know people from People's Temple, the Jim Jones group. The damage that these groups do is off the charts. And most cults you'll never hear about because they don't blow themselves up or others, but they destroy the families.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get a call, what about this group? And I'll go look. And I said, well, tell me what they think about the family. Because even before I've heard a word of their theology, when you run into how they destroy the family, I already know what I'm dealing with. The devil hates the family. And God instituted the family. So when they're destroying the families, as in Jehovah's Witnesses, as in the garbage eaters and all these different groups, when they're destroying these bonds that God gave us, he tells us to honor our parents, and you run into these people out there, no, we hate our parents. That's how we prove we love Jesus. I'm like, oh, gosh. You're so far away. Anyways, so those are some of the dynamics that we're playing with when we go out and talk to people. So part of what we do is analogous to what Paul did in Acts 17. That's kind of been our model. When Paul leaves Jerusalem, right, and he goes out to Athens or Thessalonica or, Ephesus or Colossians, and he runs into a zillion pagan religions. Well, that's what's going on Mars Hill in Athens. He's running into a group of people who, it's based on Aristotle and the whole academy and all this stuff that's 300 years later now. When these guys sit around and talk about religious and philosophical questions, right? That's the ideal of Plato and Aristotle.
Right.
So for us, we go to these places to engage with them. So usually what we do as we start this process, we'll go up to a booth. It doesn't matter if we've talked to these people at this booth 100 times. There's two things going on. One, we want to learn, have they changed? Because groups change. Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons have both changed a couple times in my lifetime. Some pretty significant doctrines. So we say, hey, what's this all about? And we let them explain themselves. And again, they're there to recruit, so they're there to tell people what they believe. And they're all excited. Hey, that's awesome. Let me tell you about this, and this is our guru, and this is what he says. And we'll listen to that. And then we'll say, hey, can I ask you a question about that after they've done their spiel? So it sets up a scenario where we've given them a chance to say what they wanted to say, and in fair play, would you let us ask a question or two? And almost always they say yes. Now again, sometimes we ask a question and the conversation slams shut in our face that they're mad. Other conversations go on for years. And I've got conversations with your rancher readers and atheists and all sorts of people that we still meet for lunch and we talk and all this kind of stuff. That's our goal, is to try to have good relationships with these folks and talk to them. But this question about Jesus being the only way comes up. And the reason it comes up again is because they don't know what they're talking about. So they'll say, well, isn't Jesus, I just had this one 2 days ago, isn't Jesus just like a bodhisattva of Buddhism? One of my students actually threw that on. Bodhisattva is an enlightened being in Mahayana, which is the largest group of Buddhists.
Okay.
And you can only say that when you know nothing about Jesus and nothing about the Buddha, which sells in America. There's a guy that comes to, I think he's too old now, he might have died, Thich Han, who comes across America for years. He lives in Paris. And Protestant and Catholic, religious leaders go to his retreat centers, and he's out. Jesus and Buddha, twin sons of the same mother. In fact, I think that's almost the title of his book. And so I actually do a whole seminar on this book, and I say, if you read this, and he tells these stories about this guy who came 2,000 years ago to teach the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism, and I'm like, oh, isn't that interesting? There's the stupid elephant story again. Jesus and Buddha are both saying the same thing. The Baha'i teach the same thing. All the religions teach the same. Everybody says this. So I said, well, actually, that's not the case. Jesus actually said this. And they go, what? Whatever it is, as soon as you quote something from the New Testament that Jesus actually says, well, Jesus says that the only way to the Father is through him. And they get deeply offended. Well, my Jesus would never say that. I've literally heard people say this to me, They literally have no background and knowledge, including people who identify themselves as Christians. They don't know what the New Testament says. They don't know what the Old Testament says. They have very little understanding of any of these things. So, like Paul on Mars Hill, part of what we're doing is we will start to take down their worldview. So, for example, if you look at Mars Hill, Paul does this. He says, well, the God who created everything does not dwell in houses made of stone and wood, right? Mm-hmm. He's saying that at a place where you can literally see temples everywhere you look, big ones, medium ones, little ones. Because the Greeks, like most pagans, believed the gods did dwell in these houses made of stone and wood. Nor is he served by human hands as if he needs anything. We'll go to any part of the Buddhist world, Hindu world, pretty much anywhere in the pagan world, and you can see people shining statues, feeding statues, bathing statues, because they literally believe God needs us to serve him. And so Paul does, Paul's basically, no, that's not right, that's not right, no, that doesn't work. And he eventually brings them to Jesus himself. So that's what we try to do, is take apart their worldview and lead them to the fact that we really are sinners. So let me illustrate this. One of the most popular beliefs in every religion I can think of is that human beings are wonderful and good. We're even divine, depending on who you talk to. If we're not already divine, we're on our way to being divine. Think the LDS or something like this. Nobody says we're sinners. We're the only ones. In fact, we were on a mission trip in Israel a few years ago. We couldn't get a single person. We talked to rabbis. Not a one of them believed that we were sinners. I'm like, dude, it's from your book, you know. Yes. But so this is very common belief. Everybody, we're born good. We have the ability to choose all these good things. And the Bible alone says there's something terribly wrong with us, you know. So I always start off with moral questions. When I start asking them questions, I'm saying, you know, I'm curious. You said that we're all God, but that we need to take care of the environment. That's very common in some of the booths we go to. Well, I don't understand it. Isn't the environment God too? Yes. Well, then why doesn't God take care of itself? It's just a simple question. It takes like 30 seconds to deal with, right? But they've never thought it through. I'll give you an even more common one. That I grew up in a very secular Jewish neighborhood in Los Angeles. All my friends growing up, for the most part, were Jewish. So I'm really familiar with those folks and stuff. And so I meet this lady at a psychic fair. I'm going to call her Susie. And Susie's a secular Jew who had gotten into the New Age movement. And there's a ton of them. They call them Hindus or Boo Jews. That's their nicknames, not mine. So they're ethnically Jewish, but they're Hindu or Buddhist by belief and practice.
Wow.
So Susie comes out from her booth. We're literally walking by. We're not going to talk to her because we figure she's selling stuff. She literally jumps out of her booth to talk to us, and she's got this little, like a little magic 8-ball that I had when I was a kid. You ask questions and you shake it. It was supposed to give you an answer. She's got something like that. So she wants to do this to us. And I said, well, sure, go ahead. So while she's trying to, do this, I'm asking, hey, so Susie, you grew up, you were Jewish, right? She goes, yeah. I'm going to start talking to her. And I said, so Susie, do you really believe that we're all God? And her eyes got huge. She goes, yes, I do. Yes, I do believe that we're all God. Okay, Susie, do you really believe that because we're all God, that this world is an illusion and that there is no such thing as good and evil? And I mean, her eyes got even bigger. Yes, that's exactly right. And guys, I'm telling her gospel. This is what they're sold on, is that we're all gods and this world's an illusion. Think the Matrix movie or something like that.
Right.
So we just have to be enlightened to get the true nature of the universe. I said, Susie, was that just God killing God at Auschwitz? And how can you, as a Jewish person of all people, believe there's no such thing as good and evil? So this is all in about a 3-minute conversation. And she screamed and left. And I did not want her to scream and left. I did want her to think through what she was saying. That literally just, the guards at Auschwitz, they're gods too, right? I mean, there's no way to make sense out of their own belief system. So I have innumerable versions of that whole conversation. On all sorts of different ways, all basically pointing to the idea that there is a problem in this world, because if they don't see that there's evil in the world, and they do, by the way, they just don't want to admit it. If they don't see there's evil, then they're not sinners. And if they're not sinners, they don't need a savior. And if they don't need a savior, they don't need Jesus. So my conversation starts with the existence of evil in the world, some version of that, depending on who I'm talking to. Not everybody's the same. A Muslim agrees the world is real. A Hindu thinks the world's an illusion. So I don't have the same conversation with those two different groups.
Right.
But I'm all trying to point them towards Jesus. And the reason I'm very happy, about getting them to Jesus is because when you compare what the Buddha said with what Jesus said, you compare what Muhammad said with what Jesus said, you compare what Baha'u'llah from the Baha'i, this is the benefit of teaching this stuff, is that I know what these people actually said, and how they actually lived and how they thought. Yeah. And I'll compare that to Jesus any day.
Right. And
so, again, in a sea of ignorance, it doesn't take much to show that, well, actually, that's not the case. That's not what Jesus taught. This is what he actually said. Would you like to read this? And we'll get into the New Testament maybe. And that's the goal. But so, the question is that do all religions teach the same thing? No. Not even for a second. In fact, it's hard to find. If I put 5 Jewish groups circling the elephant, you can't get them all to agree. Right. Well, for that matter, 5 Christians or 5 Muslims or 5 Hindus or Buddhists, forget it. They don't even agree within themselves. It's very hard to say all Muslims believe X or all Mormons. There's hundreds of different Mormon groups that can't stand each other, just like in the Christian world as well. So, again, the analogy is false, but they believe it because they're ignorant. So part of what we're trying to do is instruct them on who Jesus actually is, and who God is. Now, I'll just give you a personal example. For me, being raised in nothing, knowing nothing, I just thought all religions were stupid. That was pretty much the lockdown in my neighborhood and in my family. And so I'm smart, so I'm not getting high and drunk all the time, getting arrested and all this fun stuff, because I'm smart, right? But if there was a God, and I never thought deeply because I was too busy partying, if there was a God, God was like this old man with a club who hated me. Every time I got busted by the cops, or every time my stepdad knocked me around, that was just God getting me for all the things I hadn't been caught at yet. That's how I thought about God. And like I said, I didn't think about it deeply because I saw no need to. Through a whole amazing set of circumstances when the Lord grabbed me. But one of the most interesting things was the thing that grabbed me the night I believed was Romans 5:8. And I'm reading this because of Israel. I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood, and Israel was a big deal. And I didn't understand why it was a big deal. I literally said, what's this piece of mud so important for? Why does anyone care? Why are people dying? I mean, it made no sense to me, right? And so I read the book, The Late Great Planet Earth, and he talks about the prophecies about Israel being destroyed, scattered all over the world, brought back together. And I'm like, dang, how do they know that? How could they possibly know that thousands of years ago? And it just happened 1948.
Right.
So my attention, I was literally high on LSD that weekend, and that sobered me up. Like all of a sudden, whoa, how do they know this? And my life was an absolute disaster. Been kicked off the basketball team several years in a row, different schools, several arrests. My family, I'm bouncing back and move forth, and it seems like both families hate me. So I'm an absolute mess. And it gets to Romans 5:8, and it just grabbed me because I thought Christianity was for good people. I didn't know anybody like that. My whole family's junks and drug addicts. Several of them in prison, some of them dead from drugs. And it says, but God demonstrates his love in this, and while we were yet sinners, Christ died for the ungodly. And I remember that just, you have that aha moment. What? What do you mean he died for the ungodly? I knew what I was. Nobody had to tell me I was a sinner. That somebody would love me was stunning.
Are you digging our theme music? Well, we dig it too. You can check out more Jane Gilman music at our website, janegilman.com. Or you can download some of her music to your playlist on iTunes. That's GILLMAN.
So it was understanding the truth about God that brought me into the kingdom. From the lie that I thought that God hated me and was beating me with a club and all these terrible things in my life, when actually God loved me. And I mean, for you guys raised in the church, that's of course God loves me. For me, it was revolutionary. That God could love somebody like me. So contrary to false information, true information about who God is got my attention. So, for example, I've had that conversation with the Baha'i, I've had that conversation with Muslims and others. To know who God really is, like I'll give you a quick conversation on Islam. I'm talking to a cab driver up in Toronto, one of the Parliament of World Religions years ago, Somali. I had no idea that Toronto's like this huge, at the time, this huge Muslim community there. And every cab driver I had was a Muslim, so that's a fun conversation. So anyways, I'm talking to this one guy, and I won't go into the whole long details about it, but a big part of it comes down to his fear of standing before Allah someday naked, with an angel telling his sins and a demon telling an angel telling his ability to keep the 5 pillars, the basic rules of Islam, and an evil spirit, the jinn, talking about his failures. And his terrifying fear that he's going to go to hell, which is horrible, and his incredible desire to go to paradise where there's all the virgins and all the rest of this crap, right? So that's the basic backdrop for most Muslim groups. And I'm talking to this fellow, and he's going to stand before God. And I looked at him and I said, I get it. I understand why you're afraid to stand before Allah. If I was like you, I would be terrified to be in front of God naked. I said, but that's why Jesus came. He came to be a covering for our sins. That's what the word atonement means. That's what the word even Christ means. That he came to cover up our sins. So we're not alone before God. We don't have to be afraid. And you can see the wheels in his eyes. You can see like he's thinking this through. And I'm like, Lord, grab this man. Now, I don't know if he ever came to Christ, but I know that he was thinking about something he'd never heard before. That Christ came to cover his sins. And that he didn't have to be alone before God. And so I just kind of wrapped that into the Muslim context a little bit so that he could see that he needs a savior. Muhammad didn't die for your sins. Muhammad, the best way to make things right with Allah is to die while you're killing somebody else. That's the only sure promise you have in Islam. Wow. So again, most people don't know the religions. I kind of do sometimes these cross comparisons, but I bring up Jesus in the middle of all these things because once you know what he actually says and does, it's so drastically different and so drastically better
Right.
Then the competition, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a real short version. I have hundreds of stories like this. I could bore you guys all day long. It's a very important question because it comes up all the time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's just what we're doing, Bill, is we're trying to put some conversations out there that people can tap into, that address some of these big things that a lot of times when you go to church, nobody wants to talk about it. And if you ask the question, people get very uncomfortable. And
the people in the pews aren't real sure of this either.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Hey, I had a girl in Nebraska tell me, well, my dad's a pastor, and he says my witch friend, she's going to heaven too.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And she was travel camp, and I'm like, whoa, I mean, Christians, they're it's not like we're exactly educated. And you're right. Unfortunately, churches don't often want to deal with this. In fact, I would say it's rare. I don't want to say that they don't, because we have churches that support us, but a lot of churches don't want to deal with these questions. And you have to wonder, is there just an insecurity themselves? Are they not sure themselves that Jesus is the only way? Are they doubting the scriptures? So when that book comes out several years ago, 10 years ago now, Love Wins by Rob Bell, because one of the top selling books on Amazon. Well, why?
Yeah.
Because people buy into this idea that it feels better. Again, I come from an extremely screwed up family. My dad is 89. My dad was raised in the Baptist church, blew it off when he left high school, and that was the end of that. He wouldn't even come to my wedding. And he hated what I do I've wasted my life according to my dad, blah, 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 blah. Okay, I would love for the idea that my dad is going to heaven, despite his entire lifetime of hating God with every ounce of his being. It's on an emotional level, it would be great to come to that belief that God says everybody, ollie oxen free, everybody goes to heaven. Universalism has a certain appeal to it, I don't want my family to go to hell. I don't want some of my friends that I raised with to go to hell. I really don't. So I come to the conclusion that there is no hell. Everybody gets to go to heaven. Yay, and that's Rob Bell. And it sells.
Right.
And it sells in the church as much as outside. So, again, we're often swimming upstream even in our Christian communities because this idea that Jesus is the only way is now offensive to people.
Right.
I had to tell me, this is a Colorado Christian, and Bill Armstrong came in 14 years ago and really turned the school around. But I was teaching there when it was very liberal. Anyways, the head of the Bible department actually told his class, and then I reaffirmed this by meeting with him, that he would be embarrassed to share the gospel with a Hindu. Why? Because that would be implying that what the Hindu believed was not true and that what he believed as a Christian was true. And that was too offensive. This, again, is a Christian leader at a Christian university.
Yeah.
So that's what I said, guys, this is a hard sell in the churches sometimes because, well, we don't know the Bible very well. And two, we know nothing about these other religions. We just assume they're nice people and God wants all nice people to go to heaven. All dogs go to heaven, so... In this case, all of us get to go to heaven. And again, as a missionary, I wish everybody would go to heaven. If I was in charge, I'm not. But if I was, that would be my heart's desire for everybody to go to heaven. What does Paul say? He'd give his own life and his own soul for his brethren to come and believe in Christ. I get it. I understand that mentality.
Yeah.
I can't refute what Jesus actually says. I'm going to go with Jesus on this one. When he says he's the only way, then I got to take that seriously. He's the only truth. I got to take that seriously. When it says he's the only life, I got to take that thing seriously. And so in our mission, that's what we try to do.
I've had the experience. I've a number of Muslim acquaintances and friends here, and I've had experience with them often that, and maybe it's because we, as you get closer, relationship changes, but. Usually if I bring up, my faith or their faith, they just kind of want to push it away and be like, why does it matter? I care about you. You care about me. Like, why do we need to bring religion into it? Like, let's just not worry about that. Or I've often heard this, like, well, you realize that Islam and Christianity have a lot of similarities, and we have this prophet who's the same, and, we have this story in our book, which is the same as in the Bible. A lot of similarities, they'll say, and they don't want to get into a confrontation. Is that something that you also run into a lot, or is that maybe because
Really describing what we're talking about. Ignorance is bliss.
Mm.
You know, I mean, it really is. And until you run into the wall, you know, I mean, you can sail along at 150 miles per hour. I heard something the other day about in LA, and I grew up driving those highways. Well, the traffic's so down now because of the lockdown that they've been arresting tons of people for driving well over 100 miles per hour. And they arrested one guy last week at 165 miles per hour on a. I remember spending 2 hours going 10 miles per hour in those highways.
Oh, yeah.
Like once the lockdown's there and there's open highways, like people are like, oh my gosh, I bought this, you know, Ferrari for a reason. Now I can go for it. People love ignorance.
Mm.
It doesn't cost my conscience anything. And oh, by the way, I can sin, and everybody can sin, and it's no problem there either. I mean, frankly, I think that's a big part of what motivates us. We're all good people. We're not really sinners. And therefore, Jesus didn't really need to die. We don't need to get in all those details. To quote one source like this, we don't need to get into that whole bloody cross and all that nasty stuff. Well, that's the heart of Christianity, is the bloody cross.
Right. Right.
So deny the need for that is basically to say we're all basically good people, and God loves good people. The fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man. You know, this is liberalism 130 years ago. But it puts us back hard, and here we are again inside of Christian organizations talking like this, you know, that people don't actually need to believe in Jesus.
Do you run into...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I say, do you run into a lot of people who are in, I would say, especially if you're with cults, or I guess what here I experience sometimes with Eastern religions, that they go towards those because they don't like how they would maybe describe like kind of how hard Christianity is, or how, you know, it's kind of, there's some really black and white things that they don't feel comfortable with. Do you feel like that happens a lot, that people gravitate towards these other religions and cults because of that?
Well, it's interesting. Different cults are infinitely stricter than other groups, so that's an interesting phenomenon. But I would say for a whole lot of people, it's exactly what you're saying. Christianity tells me that homosexuality is a sin. That's what the Bible says. Except we got a whole movement out there inside the church now saying, no, it's not. You know, that we're dealing with that. No. But if you want to see yourself as open-minded and tolerant, accepting, and that's what God is, right? He's loving, and loving means accepting. So I have to accept you. Well, I was a cop as I mentioned, I was a cop for 3 years. I worked as a deputy sheriff. I worked primarily in the Jefferson County Jail, which is the western suburbs of, on the west side of Denver. And I can't even count the number of pedophiles, baby rapists, mass murderers, serial killers, contract killers. I'm at the flower of humanity in 3 years, which is why my time in Nebraska was kind of healing to get away from this crap.
Wow.
So accepting, really? What about a guy who rapes his 2-month-old daughter? And I met that guy, by the way. And when they asked me that before I even took the job, that was my last question on my oral exam. I thought they were lying to me. Come on, that's not serious. Come on, they're not true.
Right.
You're lying. You're just giving me a hypothetical. No, it was true. It's stunning. Romans 1 just comes alive inside of the prison system. You realize what people are capable of.
Wow. And
it is overwhelming. So when you tell me that we're all just divine sparks, we're all God's children, blah, 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 and I go, well, what about the divine spark that does X? And what about the one that does this? I'll give you, this is an actual conversation from about 3 years ago to Psychic Fair in Colorado Springs. So I'm dealing with this guy. He's like 5 years older than me, so he's like in the real hippie generation. All right? And he's telling me all this stuff, and he's in this belief that we're all God, and everything that happens to us is good. And I said, so let me ask you this. So what about a guy who rapes and murders a 2-year-old girl, his daughter? I've met several of these guys, by the way. And he goes, Bill, this is going to be hard for you to understand. Now, my response is not the good one. I'm warning you ahead of time. I don't usually do something like this, but this was so stunning to me. He goes, Bill, I know it's going to be hard for you to understand, but you got to understand that at a certain level, at this level that looks bad, but at a higher spiritual level, there's nothing but joy there.
Oh my gosh. And
I said, how much LSD did you do to come to the conclusion that raping and murdering a 2-year-old girl brings joy? And again, that's a little bit more upfront than I normally am. But I was so stunned by how cavalier he was about the rape and murder of a little girl. That he would bless that and call that joyful. Even the Hindu and Buddhist didn't say that much, but welcome to American New Age stuff,
Wow.
You have to celebrate everything, accept everything. So I'm like, I'm going to put evil in their face and make them, I call it the Hitler pill. I'm going to make them chew on it. If the world's an illusion, then Hitler's cool, right? You're down with that? You're down with Charlie Manson? You're down with Mao Zedong? You're down with Klebold and Harris? You're down with, sex slave trade or whatever? Really? You're cool with that? Everything's God, right? And everything's good? So you're okay? Well, the world's an illusion, none of that's happening, you're okay with that too? And 99% of the people know darn well that that's not acceptable, that that's wrong. They know it.
Right.
And I know this because Romans 1 tells me that God gave them a conscience. And Romans 2 goes into it, right? Romans 1 and 2 basically say that God gave the Gentiles a conscience. So I know these people have a conscience. And I'm trying to get to it. It's been buried by the guru's teaching, by this prophet's teaching or that religious teaching. But I know they have a conscience. And every once in a while I'll have somebody, I've had it happen like 3 times over 30 years now, where somebody will say, well, yeah, what Hitler did was fine. And I know darn well they're lying through their teeth.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't know when you're going to be honest about this, maybe 3 weeks from now, but I want you to wake up at 3 a.m. and wonder why you had to lie about what you actually think, just so you wouldn't lose that argument to that stupid Christian you were talking to that one day. Because they know darn well these things are wrong. And in philosophy, there's a concept called robust evil, which is from an atheist, basically saying, we all know, you Christians can't hide behind this. We all know what evil is. Okay, fine. Go with that. You know. So now what do you do about it?
Yeah.
And you say that's why we need a savior, gang.
Yeah.
And if we're just little godlings, we don't need a savior.
Right.
So sometimes our anthropology or our belief about human, determines our theology.
Right.
What we believe about ourselves tells us about what we believe about God.
Yeah, it's interesting, Bill, when you kind of come into like this one-on-one dialogue with somebody that really wants to believe that everything is kind of all on the same level. I stayed at a Airbnb about a year ago, and the other guy staying there, he was kind of like a world religion major in college, and he was studying something else now. Some sort of like kind of new agey massage. I can't remember the name of it. But we were talking about faith, and he grew up Baptist, and it really didn't set well with him. He didn't like the idea of Jesus being so exclusive. And so we started talking about it, and I was really trying to be delicate, but there came a point where he's like, I really don't like that you're not taking my faith in Jesus in the way I believe about Jesus to be genuine or something. I can't remember exactly how he phrased it, but he was offended, that I was pointing to a more exclusive view of Jesus as the way and not, considering his other alternatives, that he was kind of putting forth. And, I really tried to tell him, like, dude, I want you to experience truth in your life. And, and he kind of kept going back to it's my truth. And, you've got yours, and we can fellowship and,
right.
And those conversations. And you want people to experience love, obviously, and truth, and that's really difficult sometimes in these conversations that we have with people. I read that book, Bill, that you told me to read, Fool's Talk. And that was a really good read. And as you're talking, the one line in that book that really stands out to me is something I think about a lot, is how he basically says, we have 2 paths. One is we see the world and the truth of the world, and we conform our lives to that truth, or we see the world and we develop our own belief system, and then we conform the world to our belief system. And I know I'm taking that just a little bit. It's not a direct quote, but
no, I get it. That's very close.
As you're talking about all these things, I'm just thinking about that. And I'm also thinking about the things that you were talking about. Man, we just want people to know Jesus the way we know Jesus. We don't want anybody to go to hell. How do you how do you do that? Obviously, it's not our power that does that. There's just so many paths we could go down from here, Bill, that I would love to maybe talk to you about down the road. But I know you can't do it today.
Sure.
But
no, it's important, and it's actually really encouraging that you guys are interested in this stuff. And I honestly really love talking to people who are fellow travelers of what the scriptures actually teach.
Mm-hmm.
I run into so many people, even pastors, who are just so disinterested in sharing the gospel.
Yeah.
So disinterested. Jesus tells us, go into all the world, make disciples. You guys all know that?
Yeah.
Making disciples is a teaching process. So again, like with me, finding out the truth of who God really is.
Yeah.
If I God is Shiva or Kali, who's there to kill and destroy, well, I'm going to act on that.
Mm-hmm.
If I believe Allah, and I believe that he hates all infidels, and I get brownie points with him for killing infidels, then I'm going to act on that.
Mm.
So our beliefs actually do matter.
Right.
And let me tell you one last story, guys. I know you guys need to break it up, but so my aunt died I'm originally from Beaumont, Texas, this little town way down southeast corner of Texas, right by Louisiana. So I'm down there for my aunt's funeral, and there's my dad, who hates God with all his heart, and there's my uncle, who's kind of become a Catholic. His second wife was a Catholic lady, so he was raised Baptist, didn't really believe much of anything. Now he's a Catholic. And so we're sitting around afterwards talking about this. And so my dad has to go into attack mode because that's who he is. And he looks at his little brother and goes, "Hey, George," he says, "do you really believe that what you believe is the only way to the truth, the only way to God?" And George, who's never been committed about anything religious, kind of looks at him sheepishly. This is his older, much bigger brother saying this, and he goes, No, not really. And then my dad points at me and goes, "Well, he does." So I said, "Hey, let me explain this to you guys, okay? Because you're thinking that it doesn't matter what you believe, really, it's all okay." I said, let's suppose I grew up like you guys grew up. I grew up in a Southern Baptist church. I go to church every Sunday, just because it's a cultural thing to do. It's what people do in the South, You're not Jewish or Buddhist, so you go to church. A very Baptist way of doing things. And I said, so one Sunday I go, and the guy gives a fundamentalist message, right out of the Bible, and God uses it, grabs my heart. And I volunteered to be a missionary to Tunisia because it so moved me. I said, now contrast that with a Muslim fellow who goes to the mosque on Friday because his family expects it, the community expects it. I don't really take it that seriously. But, I got to make appearances. I go one Friday, and I hear a fiery fundamentalist, message, and I buy the whole thing. And I volunteer to go kill that missionary in Tunisia. Don't tell me there's no differences, guys. Because beliefs have applications. Beliefs have consequences. And you believe the wrong thing about God, you can end up murdering people. And that happens all the time.
Yeah.
And so, to me, like I said, I'll stack up Jesus with these competitors any day of the week.
We hope you enjoyed our conversation with Bill Honsberger. Join us again next week. Seth and I will be talking amongst ourselves. Have a blessed week.
And I'm made by hand. I've got a mother, a sister, and a brother who have gone home. I'm determined to go and see them, a good Lord, over on that distant shore. As I go down to that river of Jordan, just to bathe my weary soul. If I could just touch the hem of his garment, good Lord, I believe it would make me whole. When I'm dead, laying in my coffin, all my friends all gather round. They can say I'm just sleeping good, Lord, the sweet peace I have found.